I am honored to be here. My name is Jim Malatras. I'm president of the Rockefeller Institute, and this is probably one of our favorite days because we get to work with really dynamic undergraduate students who want to make a difference in public policy, and that's what these students are doing. And the Center for Law and Policy Solutions, of which they're part of, and we treat them just like every other researcher here. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad, because it's tough work. And it's hard work, but it's important work. And that effort's is led by our great director, who is Dr. Katie Zuber. So let's give her a big round of applause for all that she does. I just want to, before I turn it over to Katie, I want to thank our partners. The Rockefeller Institute does this in partnership with several other institutions. So the University of Buffalo Law School, the Albany Government Law Center, the Rockefeller College of Public Policy and Affairs, and as well as the Rockefeller Institute are all members of the Center for Law and Policy Solutions. So they all have a role in shaping what we do here, and it's really great stuff. As well as none of this happens without financial support. It's about love and money, but usually people prefer the money over love. And this helps because these are paid internships. What's important for us is that they come and they earn a salary just like everybody else does. They're treated with the same respect and dignity as other researchers. It depends on the researchers you talk to. Sometimes here, maybe they don't feel like we all treat with the same dignity and respect. But anyway, the financial support is important. And I want to thank three institutions and people for their financial support this year that helps this program move forward. The University of Albany Foundation made a pretty significant financial contribution. SUNY Old Westbury, one of our sister campuses on Long Island. And then one of our advisory members, Tim Taylor, who's not only a big part of the center, he's a big part of the University of Albany, and he does a lot of teaching on the side to really help students. So let's give them a big round of applause for their financial assistance. I would be remiss if I say you too can also be financial contributors to the program. There's brochures right outside. Katie will smile until you sign up, and then she will frown if you don't. So please, without further ado, I'm really looking forward to this wonderful presentation from our students this year. I want to introduce Dr. Katie Zuber.
So again, I just want to second Jim's message and say thank you to all of you for coming out. I want to give a special thanks to some of our special guests in the audience here today from the Department of Corrections and Community Supervision. We have with us Assistant Commissioner Linda Holman, Director of Education, Emily Bessett, and also the Director of Academic Education, Kimberly Leonard. So thank you for taking the time out of your really busy schedules to come here and see the kinds of work that our students are doing here. It really means a lot to us, and as I mentioned, it's a little terrifying for the students, but they'll get over that. So I also want to really thank the staff of the Rockefeller Institute, not just for helping us to put this particular event on today, but for all of the behind-the-scenes work that goes on to making something like this happen. So over the course of the semester, our students actually held individual meetings with some of our researchers here to discuss topics that maybe fell out of the scope of the research you're going to be hearing today. They had workshops on how to conduct qualitative interviews, which is something that most undergraduate students typically don't do throughout the course of their academic career. They received training on how to make an effective PowerPoint, which hopefully is about to pay dividends here in just a couple of minutes. So everything from making sure that these students got paid on time to making sure that the carriage house where they do their work was heated was really made possible by all of the staff here, and we really couldn't have done it without you. So thank you very much to the Rockefeller staff. So these students actually represent our third cohort of students from the Center for Law and Policy Solutions. And I don't typically like to brag, but since somebody thought it was a good idea to give me the microphone, I thought I would take this opportunity to do something like that. For starters, we really are expanding. Jim mentioned that we were fortunate this year to receive some financial backing from some of our sister schools and faculty members. I'm also happy to announce that in the fall of 2019, we are actually going to be welcoming students from the Hudson Valley Community College. So it's going to be Hudson Valley Community College students working with SUNY Albany undergraduates to really tackle whatever it is, the next big issue that's coming down the pipeline. I also want to just touch on how much our students really accomplish, not only while they're here, but what they do when they get out. So individuals from our spring 2018 cohort. That was our inaugural cohort, and they wrote a report on drug treatment courts as an alternative to incarceration. They presented their research at SUNY Oneonta's undergraduate research conference, as well as SUNY's Applied Learning Conference. And with respect to that latter conference, it's not a student undergraduate conference. It's actually a conference of faculty, educators, and staff. And so I'm really proud to say that some of our students were some of the only students who were actually there to educate the educators on how to offer an applied learning experience. And so that was really something that set the fall 2018 cohort apart. Fall 2018, our students wrote a report entitled Beyond Roe, which really looked at what are the kinds of consequences for New York State in the event of a reversal of the Roe v. Wade decision, which of course is the landmark decision upholding a woman's right to choose. Their research actually received coverage in Crain's, New York, which is more than I can say about some of my own research. And also, it earned them an invitation to the governor's office, particularly to the governor's mansion for a reception following passage of the Reproductive Health Act. So I tell these students this semester that it's their job to write a report good enough to get me back to the governor's mansion, because the food is much better there than it is here. So. Again, what I really love about this internship is the unique opportunities that it affords students. So even, I want to thank our partners at the Government Law Center. I saw Kendra here, yeah, for inviting our students this semester to come to a roundtable discussion. Also Scott Fine, who serves on our advisory board. It was a great opportunity for undergraduate students and political science majors in particular who really aspire to go to law school, to sit down with some law school students, share their research, brainstorm some ideas, and just get a sense of what it looks like to be on a law school campus. Students this semester were also invited to share their research with President Javidan Rodriguez of SUNY Albany, as well as Secretary of State Rosario Rosado, who actually used to teach college courses in prison facilities and really holds this issue dear to her heart. So a lot of opportunities that traditionally are not afforded to undergraduate students who are really still early on in their career. So with that being said, you can all come on in here. So very quickly, I do just want to introduce you to these students from my left going downwards. We have Mickey Rose, who is a public policy major and Africana Studies minor. Trevor Kraft, who is a senior with a major in public policy and management. Ofu Takor, who is a senior with a major in political science and a dual minor in journalism and French. That journalism piece came in really handy for some of the work we did this semester. Nick Gonzalez, who is a senior with a major in political science and a minor in communications. And Kevin Kelleher, who is a junior with a major in political science and a minor in philosophy. So again, thank you for being here today, and I'm happy to turn it over to them.
So good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us. This semester as a cohort, we focused on studying post-secondary education programs in correctional facilities, also known as college and prison programs. College and prison programs are defined as post-secondary education programs that are run by accredited universities and colleges throughout correctional facilities. Based on existing research, we know these programs work because they reduce recidivism rates as well as increase employment opportunities. But we focused our study on what makes an effective program. We as a team wanted to unpack the black box and get inside of these programs to see what an effective program truly looks like.
So throughout the course of this semester, we conducted a comprehensive survey of academic literature on college and prison programs. That included books, peer-reviewed journals, and newspaper articles. We then paid attention to what makes college and prison programs successful, unsuccessful, and the questions that remained unanswered. So between March and April, we conducted 9 interviews with college and prison program staff ranging from associate deans, professors, and former government officials. Admittedly, we did not reach out to officials from docs. That is an area for future research, though. So each interview was about 45 minutes to an hour, and we recorded them for note-taking purposes and then transcribed them. And lastly, we analyzed the data and compiled findings on what works and what challenges must be met to expand and promote higher education within New York State prisons.
When we start talking about college and prison programs, it's helpful to have context of what's happening on the federal level. In the 2016 presidential elections, criminal justice reform became a very popular issue for debate. Issues like expanded drug rehab programs, elimination of mandatory minimum sentencing, and fair sentencing initiatives all became issues on the campaign platform. When President Donald Trump was elected into office, there were fears among some that the progress that had been made towards criminal justice reforms would get washed away by the changing of administrations. In 2019, President Donald Trump eliminated many of these fears by signing the First Step Act into Congress. This expanded drug rehab programs, fair sentencing initiatives, mandatory minimum sentencing reforms, and keeps incarcerated individuals closer to home. Many pointed out that this initiative would have been made even more progress if it had included support for higher education. This was found in Congress by the introduction of the Restoring Higher Education and Learning Act. This act was introduced by 3 Democrats and 2 Republicans as a bipartisan initiative to restore Pell eligibility to incarcerated students and has been called a very good and interesting possibility by Education Secretary Betsy DeVos. This is indicative of the federal momentum going towards college and prison programs and criminal justice reform in general.
So the Criminal Justice Investment Initiative was first established by the Manhattan District Attorney Cyrus R. Vance. It supports over 8,000 New Yorkers and seeks to invest $250 million into community projects predominantly in Manhattan. Through partnerships with grassroots organizations, it works to increase these organizations' strategies for training and the technical assistance that they will provide to their grantees to ensure that their grantees can see long-term sustainability. They work with organizations across various sectors, and while increasing their appeal and functionality at their delivery locations, they work to make sure that undeserving groups are able to access these services.
So we have recently seen a lot of bipartisan movement towards criminal justice reform, and especially with higher education. However, we know from past efforts that the road to accessible college and prison education is not an easy one. We know that from when in 2014, Governor Cuomo released a proposal to invest in college and prison programs throughout New York State. And because he believes that college and prison should truly that prison should truly be about rehabilitation and not just punishment. And so even though a Siena College survey had found that 53% of voters approved of this initiative, many New York State legislators publicly opposed this initiative, and with New York Representative Chris Collins even going as far as to introduce the Kids Before Cons Act that would prohibit the Department of Education from funding college and prison program initiatives. Because of the backlash that Governor Cuomo received, and because of videos like the one I'm about to show you now, Governor Cuomo ended up deciding not to include this initiative in his 2014-2015 legislative budget.
My husband's currently serving in the military, but I don't qualify for any education benefits under the GI Bill, so I work 2 jobs right now to pay for my education. And now you're telling me that taxpayer dollars are being used to fund prisoners' education? I don't see how that's fair.
It's going to take me 20 years to pay off my student loans. Maybe I should have just robbed the bank instead.
Despite the opposition by some lawmakers to the proposal to incorporate higher education into New York State prisons, the academic literature surrounding the subject has been consistently clear. In 2013, the RAND Corporation published a meta-analysis of all the academic literature published between 1980 and 2010 on corrections education and found that, on average, education programs reduced recidivism rates by 43%. In 1991, there was a 26% recidivism rate for individuals who had earned a degree while they were incarcerated, and more recent studies, like those found by the Bard Prison Initiative, founded in 2001, shows that graduates of the Bard program have a 2% recidivism rate, while those graduating from Cornell's prison education program, also in New York, founded in 2008, have a 7% recidivism rate. These decreases in recidivism rate are also found at significant savings to the taxpayer. There's a 5-to-1 savings to spending ratio on every dollar spent towards educating inside prisons. It costs roughly $65,000 a year to house a person within New York State prisons, and about $5,000 to educate them. The national average for recidivism rates is about 76.6% within 5 years. So when prisoners don't recidivate back into the prison system, the taxpayers save a tremendous amount of money. The Pew Research Fund found that if states could reduce their recidivism rates by just 10%, they would save an average of $635 million. But the savings are not the only benefits of these programs. The Rand Corporation also found that there's a 13% increased likelihood of finding employment post-release with a degree. Seeing as 65% of people typically find employment within 8 months of release, 13% increase is actually highly significant.
The government's response to college and prison has varied over time. The Higher Education Act of 1965 was the first proposal that allowed funding for eligible low-income students to attend college. And eventually that act was amended to include college and prison programs and students who were incarcerated. However, this success was very short-lived, and with the Violent Crime Control Act of 1994, that meant that incarcerated students were no longer allowed to receive Pell Grant and public funding to attend college. And the results of this ended up being disastrous in that the number of college and prison programs in New York ended up falling from 70 in 1994 to just 4 in 2004. However, despite the lack of public funding, New York continues to be a leader when it comes to the number of college and prison programs that we offer, with many of these programs concentrated in the southeastern part of the state, with less programs available in the western and northern and central parts of the states. And because of this disparity in the amount of programs available, a lot of times for an incarcerated student or for an incarcerated person, whether or not they have a college and prison program available to them is largely dependent on where they end up and the luck of the draw rather than ability.
So it's important to note that we're very aware that college and prison programs are effective in reducing recidivism rates and leading to better employment opportunities to those who are able to participate. But we wanted more insight into the challenges and the best practices that can encourage a successful program. So as we said, we'll continue on to discuss our findings that result from a series of interviews and research that we've done throughout the semester.
And based on those interviews we've conducted, we've identified 4 implementation challenges that we see to be the most critical in determining the effectiveness of a college and prison program. So those challenges are eligibility, recruitment, and admissions, the quality of instruction inside of the correctional facility, the providing of re-entry services to students inside of these facilities, and funding for these programs. So starting off with eligibility and recruitment, in New York State, 60% of incarcerated individuals have a high school credential. What that statistic shows us is that there exists a pool of candidates that are eligible for these programs, but what's not always clear is how every person who may be eligible for these programs has access to programs inside of a correctional facility. Factors such as criminal history, anticipated disciplinary issues, and even the desire to withhold an education from an incarcerated student as a form of punishment can affect a prospective student's ability to participate or even apply to a college and prison program. Another thing that arises from this is recruitment for these programs. So what we see throughout the interviews is that often these programs are recruited by word of mouth. So students are saying, hey, I'm in this class, I'm learning, it's great. And another student's like, oh, how can I learn more about that or take advantage of a program like that? That's not the most effective way to share these types of programs inside of a correctional facility. One program like NYU specifically, they post billboards and they have specific dates where they have, learn more about the college and prison programs. But overall, consistently throughout the programs, we don't see a systematic approach to recruiting for college and prison programs. The next thing to address is the admissions process. So for the admissions process, it typically either involves a placement exam where a student tests and then they determine their level of readiness for college and prison programs, or sometimes there's open admission. So really, program to program, it varies as how students can enroll. Some offer open admissions where if students do not score high enough on those placement exams, they're then placed in college prep or remedial courses. And we have other programs like the Barred Prison Initiative, for example, which requires an intensive screening process, an application process, an interview. So it really varies again on access to these programs and the criteria that they're going to use to consider students in this program. One thing that's important to note is the funding component here, specifically relating to college prep. Not all programs have the opportunity to offer college prep to their students. That's typically due to funding limitations, so where they can allocate their money, and because a lot of money is coming from private donors, they're not actually able to put money into remedial courses or non-credit bearing courses. So again, we see a large population of students, that can take advantage of these programs, but because of the limitations that I just mentioned, the actual participation in these programs significantly decreases.
The second challenge is a series of challenges that revolve around the quality of instructions offered within these facilities. The first issue, or the first challenge I should say, is the degrees that are offered. Most programs are relatively small, and many are provided by community colleges, and thus either offer college credit or associate's degrees. There are relatively few programs that offer a bachelor's degree, with Bard being one of the notable exceptions. And like one of my colleagues mentioned earlier, this is mostly luck of the draw. Where you end up and what facility you're housed in largely determines the educational outcomes that are available to you. There is one postgraduate opportunity available to incarcerated students through the New York Theological Seminary. It's a male correspondence program that only includes faith-based programming like religious studies. The second issue is course offerings. This is a two-part issue. First, because most programs are relatively small and many are new, they don't have representation from every discipline across the colleges. Teachers are usually working on a volunteer basis, and the primary teachers that are interested in teaching in these programs typically come from the liberal arts. The Barred Prison Initiative has 165 different course offerings, but they are by far the exception. The second reason is that the faculty also understand that there are limitations to the kind of courses that can be taught in a correctional facility due to valid concerns around security. There's justified hesitation around teaching issues that revolve around racism, policing, economic inequality, and things that incorporate social justice due to concerns over the externalities that these might have within the prison population after classrooms have ended.
Another important solution that we came up with was developing relationships between docs and the facility.
Okay, so there's obviously security requirements that come with teaching and bringing faculty inside of a prison. So there's restrictions on the type of materials you can actually physically bring into the prison. So, for example, a CD could be declared a Class 2 weapon within a prison, but if you were to use it on a base campus, it would just be a normal, video you're showing. And another example is balloons can be determined as contraband. So you have to be very creative and cognitive as to what you're bringing in as faculty into the prison. And I think a good example of this is one of the facilities, one of the teachers brought in a lab kit that actually had 16 parts. And they were very creative because they brought in things like toy race cars and rubber bands in order to actually teach this material creatively and effectively. So that just shows how you have to be very aware of the setting you're teaching in and how you have to be responsive to the restrictions that the facility actually has in place.
Those restrictions also include space. Most of these prison facilities were not designed for educational housing, and as a result, don't contain libraries, study halls, and computer labs most of the time. Computer labs in particular are particularly expensive, and they also require a buy-in from the facility to A, sequester the space, and B, staff the facility to make sure it's up to security standards. And even when these things have been implemented, there's still no internet access in most facilities due to security concerns. This limits access to things like up-to-date resources for research, keeping in correspondence with professors over email, and access to administrative records and resources on campus easily through the internet.
So there are actually multiple reasons why faculty want to teach in prison, and that ranges from just general curiosity of teaching in the prison setting all the way to enriching the incarcerated individuals' lives. And it's just very rewarding work in general. And it's actually fairly easy to find faculty. They don't have many problems getting teachers in and stuff like that. However, this work is not cut out for everybody. So there can be a sense of culture shock when teaching in this facility because it's not a familiar environment. It's actually very unfamiliar. So like it doesn't replicate a conventional classroom exactly. Just walking into the building and hearing the gate close behind you can be overwhelming, and then seeing armed guards and like prison cells as you're being transported to the classroom can be concerning for some teachers. So the second challenge to teaching in prison is you have to be very flexible and creative. So in order to be successful, you have to be able to adapt to the setting you're teaching in. There can be problems which arise within the prison setting that wouldn't necessarily occur on a base campus, but you need to be able to adapt and think on your feet and find a way to teach the material in the setting that you are in. So an example of this is one of the facility members was bringing in a book and teaching it throughout the course of the semester, but one day they were denied clearance of the book into the facility. So they responded in the best way you could by going and just putting it back in your car or locker and going into the classroom and just thinking on your feet on how you can really just teach the class without that book and just responding in an overall positive manner to not having that book cleared. So the third challenge to teaching in prison is it's very taxing and time consuming for the educators. So many of the educators are volunteers, but that varies from institution to institution. And it can take up to 45 minutes just traveling each way to get to the prison and then having to go through the process of getting cleared and getting all your materials entered into the prison. That could take up to an hour before you're actually transported to the classroom. So then you teach your course and you have to get reevaluated out of the facility and then travel another 45 minutes home. So it really is an all-day event for people that some are volunteers, so not being paid to do all that work. So despite the fact that this is a challenging job, there is no mandatory preparation for teachers who want to teach in prison. So new teachers often have to rely on colleagues' experiences in order to gain an understanding on what the job actually entails and what can be coming ahead of them.
So now, the importance of developing a relationship between Okay. So 95% of all incarcerated individuals are expected to at some point be released back in society, and 80% are expected to be placed on parole supervision. The purpose of reentry services is basically to effectively help these individuals transition back into society. Their services include like drug-free housing, substance abuse counseling, among many other services. Without these services, 67% are expected to be rearrested in 3 years, and this number increases to 76% in 5 years. Through reentry services, we see that these percentages decrease by 40%. The factors contributing to these individuals rearresting isn't solely parole violation, but also the lack of resources with issues with job security and lack of education opportunities offered to these individuals. We see that even with the Fair Chance Act and other ban-the-box policies, big businesses still discriminate on these individuals on the basis of their criminal record. So for challenges, there are several challenges that come from offering reentry services. One being that these groups are often housed in facilities far removed from their home communities. This leads to communication barriers between superintendents in these facilities, program directors, and then officials in reentry services in the communities based in wherever these individuals are originally from. We see that this is intensified by the second issue, of reentry services often being separate from these college and prison programs, which is why they need to reach out to these outside organizations, because unlike big programs like the Bard Institute or like the NYU program, they don't necessarily have the resources to provide these individuals with reentry services.
So the final challenge that we will address today is funding. And when it comes to funding, the lack, and really the lack thereof of public funding, that means that most programs in New York are funded by private entities and philanthropy, and which a lot of program directors actually expressed a lot of respect for that, in that private funding allows them a certain amount of flexibility that they don't receive from public funding. So the money could be spent how they wanted to spend it, and there weren't really that many strings attached. However, these programs still have to operate with a finite amount of resources, and smaller budgets actually end up creating a situation where a lot of these programs are seen as administratively light. And in that, I mean that a lot of these program directors are wearing multiple hats. They are teaching, they are advising, and they're then also running the programs. So they don't really have the time to then sit down and write grants and request more money. And then the final problem that we are seeing with just the accessibility to private funding is that new programs have a really difficult time getting off of the ground. They don't have the background to prove to investors that they are successful, that they can be successful. And so that means that a lot of these new programs end up just not being able to fully establish themselves.
So our interviews yielded that there's no one-size-fits-all for college and prison programs. Unfortunately, you can't just make a handbook and, put it online and expect that all of the correctional facilities will just be able to replicate that type of program perfectly, because that's just unfortunately not how it works. There's other circumstances that come into play, such as the college, the prison, and the state. But that being said, we know that there are some general rules and principles that can help guide the development and implementation of these programs throughout New York State effectively. Just want to touch on this quote that actually came from a director from a program inside of a correctional facility. And she noted that without the cooperation of docs, the prison, and your educational institution, you might as well not even bother trying at that point. You need the cooperation from all of the stakeholders. You need everyone to be on the same page, and that's how you're going to be able to create an effective program and implement it on a larger scale throughout New York State.
One of the most important things to have when you're starting a college and prison program and maintaining one effectively is having a strong relationship with the Department of Corrections and Community Supervision. At the level of the state, docs can provide information via training sessions, manuals, and meetings about the institutional demands that are placed upon correctional facilities by housing a college and prison program and the best practices to navigate them. Establishing formal agreements with docs can also provide colleges with assistance in providing resources, transferring college credits among and between college and prison programs, and admission of qualified students to colleges upon release.
So now, the importance of developing relationships between docs and facilities. This solution is meant to alleviate any tension that can arise between these parties based on the issues that was earlier mentioned, while also working to ensure that these parties are able to negotiate strategies to ensure that the participants of college and prison programs are given the quality education that they deserve.
So the last thing to address is just standardizing these programs. We have to acknowledge that these programs do cause, a lot of extra work, especially for the correctional officers that, in a way, although they're not teaching the material, they have extra responsibilities now with, transferring inmates from their cell to the classroom, helping the faculty get in through the prison, go through that clearing process. So we have to acknowledge that part. And what we recommend is that we encourage colleges and universities that are offering these programs to do everything they can to reduce the burden that is placed on staff inside of the correctional facility. And one way we recommend they do that is by just standardizing programs over. But the other side is that not all programs have the resource to standardize them. We talked earlier about funding versus college prep versus not having college prep, and that will carry over because, like Ofu mentioned, a lot of these programs are administratively light, and that's because of the resources that they have. So therefore, standardizing programs is recommended, but we also have to note the funding component that comes there, and not all programs are able to actually do that.
So when it comes to supporting the faculty, we came up with 3 recommendations or solutions. The first being compensate the faculty. So you can offer the teachers like a salary like you would any other teacher. And because it's often the case that if you don't offer pay, you may limit your pool of applicants. So some programs actually have to rely on graduate students to teach these courses, which might not be the best prepared to teach these courses. You can also offer course releases to the teachers, so they kind of have an option whether they want to teach 1 or 2 of their courses within the prison and then the rest on the base campus or vice versa. The second policy recommendation is to establish a relationship with the staff and students. This can lead to success for not just the teachers, but the program in general. So the teachers have to understand how to act within the confine of the prison and what to wear and stuff like that. So one associate dean actually makes sure when she goes into the prison, she uses her title of associate dean to reinforce that relationship that she's there to do a job also. And she doesn't share any information like her name or where she's from, stuff like that. She really just draws a line in the sand that establishes a concrete relationship that she's a dean, she's there to teach, stuff like that. So a strong relationship with the correctional staff members and students can provide a smooth transfer from a base campus to the prison setting and just make the overall job more applicable to a conventional setting. Lastly, there can be a state-mandated training. Creating a training will give teachers exposure to the prison setting and an overall better idea of what the job entails. So a good initiative that can be mirrored is the New Jersey Prison Teacher Initiative, which has a group of teachers actually come together and design the courses, and they share grading responsibilities and stuff like that. And then they have to pass a criminal background check done by the New Jersey Department of Corrections. And then they actually have to go through an orientation session prior to actually participating in the teaching and prison program.
And so when it comes to funding, we have seen that funding is truly critical to the successful implementation of these programs. And the Vera Institute of Justice has actually reported that Second Chance Pell has educated more than 4,900 students in 2017, a 231% increase from the year before. And in New York alone, Second Chance Pell has offered 147 courses to more than 500 incarcerated students through that program. Additionally, Governor Cuomo has stated that the Danny Grant will create more than 2,500 seats for prison reentry programs at 17 New York State correctional facilities over the next 5 years. Given the benefits of post-secondary education, Congress should truly consider reinstating Pell Grants and public funding for incarcerated students, and New York State and other states should also follow by also reinstating their own state funding for college and prison programs. Research shows that removing the federal ban on Pell Grants for people in prison would increase employment rates by 10% for formerly incarcerated individuals. And lastly, even though we know public funding is very important, we have to also recognize that it does come with some strings attached. And we have heard concerns that we should be careful not to solely focus on vocational training, because there is also a lot that can be learned from liberal arts and social sciences.
So currently in the New York State legislature, there's a piece of legislation that would actually create a commission on post-secondary education programs throughout New York State. That piece of legislation was introduced by Senator Bailey, and the sentiment behind the commission is that you have all of the relevant stakeholders there having this discussion like we're having today. So it requires that the Commissioner of Docs someone from the Division of Parole, as well as the New York State Department of Education, SUNY Chancellor or designee, the CUNY Chancellor or designee, and then, of course, the policymakers just sit on a committee and have these discussions. They would then offer their recommendation after a year to the governor on how to move forward college and prison programs, and that topics include funding as well as just the implementation and effectiveness of them inside of the prison, and then that would later go on to be introduced to the state legislature.
We also understand that in certain communities and constituencies, this can be a tough sell. Across the federal and state levels, there has been significant bipartisan support for criminal justice reforms like college and prison programs. Research shows that public attitudes towards tough-on-crime policies have significantly waned since the 1990s. For example, the Pew Charitable Trust have found that 90% of voters prioritize reducing recidivism over enforcing long-term sentences, and that 72% support rehabilitation and training to re-enter society, while a meta-analysis of public opinion polls between 1996 and 2011 found that 64% of voters believe that more money should go towards education and job training to combat the socioeconomic problems that lead to crime. This belief is held in particular by young voters, 19 to 29, who are 77% in support of spending more money to educate people within correctional facilities. More broadly, though, providing education to incarcerated individuals is not putting cons before kids. New York State has embraced providing a quality education by becoming a national leader through passage of the Excelsior Scholarship. Now individuals making under $125,000 a year can pursue a quality education through a New York State facility without any cost to them from their tuition. This is not an either-or sort of argument. This is about providing quality education to law-abiding citizens and those who have been largely shortchanged by the system as it currently exists.
Finally, to expand on Trevor's sentiments, implementing college and prison programs takes one of the many essential steps toward correcting the many injustices within the penal system, a system often referred to as modern-day slavery. This system targets people of color through anti-drug laws, hypersurveillance, and racial profiling, and then arrest and convict them on charges often dismissed when committed by their white counterparts. 1 in 3 black men are imprisoned versus 1 in 17 white men. After serving their time, the newly released lose their right to vote. In some states, this is temporary. In other states, this is indefinitely. They lose their Social Security benefits, the right to bear arms, and so many other citizen rights. Being that this system is prone to targeting people of color, especially black men, it covertly works to disenfranchise an already oppressed population. College and prison program works to level the playing field for marginalized groups and isn't meant to take away privileges from one group in order to provide them for another, but is meant to correct the historical wrongs that have been done in this system.
Thank you, everyone.
So again, I want to say thank you to all of you. You did an absolutely fabulous job, but it's not over yet because we do have an opportunity for folks in the audience to be able to ask any questions that they have regarding both the content of the research as well as the internship experience more broadly. So do we have a mic in the room? Oh, yeah. Okay, Sabrina here. If you have a question, just raise your hand and Sabrina will come on over.
Hello. Hi. Nice to see all you guys. You did a very, very great job, and you should be very proud of yourselves. I haven't seen such a comprehensive overlay of the lay of the land in New York State, other than my mouth most of the time. So I'm Clarice Sorrente. I'm the prison education coordinator. I met most of you already for SUNY system. My question is, have you done within your research, did you do a deep dive about the experience of those who are formerly incarcerated as they engage higher education institutions upon release, how those campuses receive those individuals, and what can be done to make it a more supportive environment, or even just in a more accepting environment? Because even from my angle, I've seen plenty of our students that have come out of these programs struggle to make that, to make that connection, to make that jump back into the community, and also to be successful in academia in a traditional sense in the community. So I just wondered if any of your research touched on that.
Well, one of my interviews specifically touched on, and a lot of interviews, that the standard they hold the students to inside of the prison is the same standard that they would outside of the facility, so that when a student leaves, and hopefully they are leaving that correctional facility, they have no problem transferring the credits that they earned inside of that facility to whatever institution they choose to pursue. So that just goes to credits, and there's like availability to go out. But now, as the support, I guess, that you noted too, one program in particular, actually, if a student had not achieved their associates at that time with the partner institution, offered a full scholarship for that student to continue their education. We see typically in the downstate area, more specifically in New York City, a lot of programs exist there for people that are leaving facilities and, they're branching out into the community. They need that support system. And they did know that, for the people that are going back upstate, there's not as many programs there to help them with that support network and with that group in terms of, assimilating back to society and hopefully using their degree for what it's intended for, to, get a job and continue academia possibly, but we do see a lot of those programs mostly downstate, so that might be a future area for research also, just how can those programs that we see downstate that strongly support individuals that are leaving prison be implemented as upstate as well, because she was quite frank, she said there's not much up there for them, so they try to do as best with those reentry services, I guess, that can really kind of play in there with pointing them to resources, letting them know that you can use the credits you earned, whether or not you have a third of your associates done or you're 3/4 the way there, you can use that degree and to continue on.
You guys did a beautiful job.
Thanks,
awesome.
Mom.
I just want to ask, with the program, do they also have like a job placement and also to educate the community, like people who have like companies? Because some companies might be very giving jobs to people who came from prison or jail. So, and also after all this education, let's say you have your 2 years degree, is there an opportunity where you have like a job placement? Because it might be very difficult for you to get a job,
I think that for a lot that is a concern for a lot of students, because we can provide degrees for people, but in the end, the stigma is very much there. And that's why we have Ban the Box. And even without Ban the Box, I said even with Ban the Box, the stigma still remains, where it's like, oh, I don't know if I want to hire someone who has been incarcerated. So I think that the first part is getting rid of that stigma, but in terms to facilitate that movement, a lot of that can really come from these programs and reentry services. And when you're a part of this college and prison program, some of them allow their students to look at resumes and learn how to find online jobs and learn how to navigate these programs. And then I know that in terms of Second Chance Pell, everything for Second Chance Pell, which is kind of like where the strings kind of come in with public funding, is that they want all of their programs to only be in sectors of the economy that that an incarcerated individual could be a part of. If that makes sense. So what they want is that they are really only focusing on jobs that an incarcerated individual could get, and so that's how they plan on streamlining the process of taking someone who was incarcerated with a degree and then leading to a better opportunity and economic outcome.
Hi. Oh no, I don't want to preempt the boss. But first, it's really quite remarkable the depth with which you deal with these issues, and I could never be you. But having said that, we're fond of saying, certainly with my children, we call them 5-year, 6-year students. They go to a 4-year school, and it takes them 5 years or 6 years to graduate. But when one's talking about inmates, a sentence could be 10 to 15, 10 to 20 for manslaughter. So you're talking about a much longer duration. Is there on day one, when they enter into the system, any sort of plan, or that you might say, well, this is day one, and I know I'm facing 15 years of incarceration until I reach my parole date, or my parole consideration date. Here's what I'd like to do. I'd like to earn my doctorate in research. or whatever. Is there any long-term plan? And I guess I ask you, and it's also for the front row, the docs authorities as well.
Well, in a lot of these programs, especially when I will talk about Second Chance Pell, is that they're only available to students who would be getting out within 5 years. So a lot of these programs are focused on students or incarcerated individuals who would be getting out sooner rather than later. And so that's where I guess your question comes in, when we have people who are there for life. Like there are incarcerated students who will be there for the rest of their lives. And so we have to decide whether or not educating them is worth it. And I would say that educating them is worth it, because education to me is a right that everyone should be allowed to have. You shouldn't be it doesn't really matter that they wouldn't get out, because we have seen time and time again that just having the classes creates a better situation for not only the incarcerated individual, but also the COs around them. They end up behaving better. They end up having more self-esteem. They end up not being as depressed when their minds are at work rather than just deteriorating over a number of years.
Hi, I also want to take my hat off to you. You guys did a fantastic job. You should give yourselves a round of applause. It's amazing. You mentioned the work. You mentioned the New Jersey faculty that at some point it seems like they met and talked about the work that they did as a collaborative effort. And my question to you is, because I hire faculty at SUNY Ulster, but from all over the state and from all different institutions, a lot of times they operate in silos. They don't necessarily get an opportunity to meet together and talk about their experience or the work that they've done. And I've done that at SUNY Ulster. But my question is there an opportunity, or are you aware of an opportunity that faculty have to come together to talk about the unique challenges that they face coming into correctional facilities? And, coming up with some kind of solutions to better help them access the facility and present their programs to the students.
I'm not exactly sure if there's if that actually happens now, but I think it definitely should happen, because when these teachers do come together, it can be very beneficial to just be receptive to everybody's views and discuss like their experience when in the prison, because it's not like you're just going and teaching a regular class. You can get like some tips or something from someone teaching within another facility, and like just going at it that way as like a team. You know what I'm saying?
Thank you. And of course, you all did a wonderful job. Thank you very much. It's from what you've said, it seems like there's a lot of support among some faculty members, especially in the humanities and the social sciences, for doing this work. And some of them are actually doing it on a voluntary basis even. I wonder, though, there's two other groups that are really important if we're going to have a pretty broad curriculum available to the facilities and the prisoners around the state. One is the administrators, and the other one would be the faculty outside of social sciences and humanities, especially in the natural sciences, and perhaps in some other fields as well. And I was wondering, are there other things, other incentives, or other ways to encourage college administrators and faculty outside of the humanities and social sciences to get engaged and participate and be active in these programs and be supportive, other than, in addition to, I suppose, having Pell and TAP available? Is it just money that the administrators are concerned about, or are there other issues that have to be dealt with if we're really going to expand access?
I don't believe that it would just be money. I mean, I think that money is obviously very important. However, when it comes down to attracting new teachers, I would definitely say that I think teachers are already attracted. But I think that the problem that we have is that there isn't really, some people might not know about the program, and there isn't really a way to, there isn't really a way to streamline. And so what we would say is that in order to, I guess, attract more, I guess, people from STEM or natural sciences, I would recommend that there would be a standardization. I think that a lot of teachers, if they are interested in teaching, they can become afraid because they just don't know. They don't know about the prison system. A lot of people don't have any experience with it. But when you have social sciences or liberal arts, a lot of us, like I know that for myself in political science, a lot of us have learned about these systems, and so we're already kind of drawn and attracted to it in a way that you're not going to get that in a math class or a science class or a science department. So you would need to reach out to those individuals.
And to that point, as these programs get bigger, they tend to start attracting faculty from other disciplines. Bard, for example, they have 165 different course offerings, and those don't just include the liberal arts. There are reports of people graduating with coursework in economics, calculus, some of the natural sciences like physics and chemistry. It's not that teachers don't necessarily want to teach in prisons, it's that the outreach isn't necessarily there. And like my colleague Ofu just mentioned, the humanities and the social sciences tend to have these issues already contained within their curriculum, but as these programs get bigger, the outreach starts to spill over into other departments, and then professors that don't seem like they would be interested based on what they teach become interested because they hear about, A, how good these guys tend to be when you start educating them. They're some of the most engaged students that many faculty have taught in quite some time, and B, just because they actually want to make a difference towards educating people that have been underserved. It's not always something that comes to the front desk of your office when you're teaching in the natural sciences, but once you have other faculty that have been engaged by the work that they're doing, it's hard to contain your excitement for it, even if you're not teaching something that directly relates to prison, mass incarceration, or social justice.
So, first of all, I want to thank you all for a wonderful presentation and just say it makes me hopeful that when folks from your generation are making the decisions and you're in those policy positions, that things will change. So I thank you very much. In response to the question about do the inmates get any type of program planning from the first day they enter, and the answer to that is yes, they do. Through multiple methods. They meet with an offender rehabilitation coordinator. They develop a program plan, which is individualized. It's done through motivational interviewing. We have an entire area that does transitional services in different phases, depending on where they are. So yes, all of that does happen. And I just want to clarify one thing when we talk about reentry. The Criminal Justice Investment Initiative, that RFP specifically included reentry planning and transition planning. And that program, and you said it best, you said, funding comes with strings sometimes, is for individuals who are within 5 years of their earliest release date. And the college that's providing the program as part of their funding is required to do exactly what you were speaking of, which is transition the students back into the community, provide the support services, help them with whether it's continuing their education or getting a job or whatever it might be. So there are pockets of that. But again, thank you very much because I am soon to retire and I'm hopeful. So thank you.
Hi, I'm Joe Popkin, Deputy Commissioner at the Division of Criminal Justice Services. You did a phenomenal job. Thank you for summarizing and bringing practitioner-informed recommendations to the fore. I think that's what Rockefeller's all about. So congrats to you. Two questions. One is, you talked a little bit about how incarcerated individuals face unique challenges, but one of the things that I think has gone overlooked, and I'd welcome your thoughts on, is student support. So when you're on a campus, you have orientation, you have transition, you have programs, you have an advisor, you have somebody who helps you navigate the landscape of higher education, making sure that you're on a degree program that makes sense, that you're taking courses that make sense, and that you're ultimately getting to the place where you want to go. Right now, given that by the year's end, we'll have higher education programming in 30 of the 54 correctional facilities, it's great, but it's not standardized. And so how would you, approach a system right now that is relatively ad hoc given the nature of the funding that we've had to go off of for so long? So that's kind of question one. And then second question is, assuming we live in the world where this is now publicly funded, we have TAP, we have Pell, What does that look like to you? And does education, higher education for incarcerated individuals become a public responsibility? Does SUNY and CUNY then have a responsibility to provide higher education programming to all 54 correctional facilities and all 47,000 people in the state of New York?
To your first question, if you look across New York State, there are a number of programs of various sizes, but the Barred Prison Initiative is actually the one that stands out the most to answer your question. They're the oldest and the largest of the private organizations that are operating within New York State, and because of their size and scope, they actually have many of the services that you mentioned, orientation, advisors, administrative support, things like that. These are all things that become open when the funding is there. Because of BARD's size, they're able to attract a lot of philanthropy and a lot of private funding, so they're able to provide these types of services. We still see in some of the smaller programs, faculty that are serving as teachers and grant writers also serving as administrators and also serving as advisors, but they're able to do this in a much more limited scope just due to the fact that they're wearing so many different hats at the same time. So as you see these programs evolve, they naturally start to replicate the things that are available on campus. It's just a matter of scope most of the time.
In response to your second question, I feel like to be honest, it's very hard to imagine a society where these programs will completely remove the experiences that these individuals experience in the job market, if I'm being honest. But I do believe that it is a public responsibility to provide these people, these individuals, with these resources, because it doesn't only improve their lives, but the general society, the safety of all, and most importantly, the economy. So it's good for all of us.
And also, I think that we've said this before, it's not either or. It's not like, okay, we educate incarcerated students, so we're not going to educate students who aren't incarcerated. I think that this can be really a spark of inspiration for when it comes to educating everyone, and then it comes to what does New York stand for when we think about higher education. And so, I would love to see a world where every facility had an education program, but even in getting there, even in trying to do that, I think that it inspires other people to then consider, okay, well, why am I struggling to pay for college? Who should I talk to then struggle to, who should I talk to? Because if you're thinking, okay, well, we shouldn't be paying, instead of thinking, okay, we shouldn't be paying for college and prison programs, you should be thinking, okay, how can I get my college funded? Or should we be funding college programs for everyone? And should everyone deserve a higher education?
First of all, fantastic job today. I'm very proud of you guys as SUNY students, and you should be very proud of yourself, so fantastic. Question, is there anything more effective at reducing recidivism than higher education in prisons?
I would say probably not going to prison at all would be the best thing. And I say that in that, like we've said, these disadvantages don't start when people enter prison. They start way before. They start in the school district that you grew up in. They start in how much money your family makes. They don't start when you go to prison. And so I would say that, like all reform, it starts from the bottom. It starts from elementary school. And you guys have probably heard of the school to prison pipeline, where so many young people of color and especially Black children are oftentimes already being incarcerated from school. They have police officers at their school. They have security checks. They're already being treated and trained to be prisoners. So, the best way that we reduce recidivism is by not having as many people go to prison in the first place.
Your focus has been on college and prison programs in New York State. Did your research extend to other states and see what initiatives they're undertaking?
Yeah, I would say that when it comes to college and prison programs, California and New York really go kind of head to head. California has really a different approach where they focus a lot on community colleges, and I think that actually could be helpful for New York as well, into where they try to have programs within. They try to have facilities that have programs. They try to do it within the community colleges, and a lot of them when incarcerated individuals are leaving, are leaving the facility, they streamline it to where they already have the incarcerated individual or the formerly incarcerated individual enrolled in their nearest university or in their nearest community college, so that they can continue their education outside of a facility. And so when we're thinking of other states, I would say California ranks pretty high, but I also know that Texas, surprisingly, actually has a very robust college and prison program as well as other states also have some programs available. But New York definitely leads.
Hi, I'm Art, and most of my college was paid for by being a corrections officer in Texas and in Washington and working in the federal prison system. So the question I have is, are there any, that you noticed, any incentives other than being personally driven or, getting released? Are there any incentives within the prison itself that would cause students to take seriously study and, become a student? The other thing that I would ask is, I work in the world of technology, and what did you see in your research with regard to technology and whether these students had access to it? And obviously when they get out, if you got a PhD in the most difficult thing, if you don't know how to do technology, it's an uphill battle. So those are my questions.
Yeah, so addressing your first question, a lot of the people that we spoke to that are facilitating these programs, especially in max facilities where most likely they're not leaving the prison, just the idea of them having something to do other than their typical work day or whatever that looks like, the freedom of intellectual curiosity and to have these conversations with people, that in itself was fulfilling for students to participate in the program, because regardless of how many credits they earn, what certificate they're getting, or if they're ever leaving the facility, they still want to be in that classroom. But I will also note that another benefit to some of these programs is that, some prisoners are required to work during the workday, and for some programs they could actually supplement. Instead of working and taking on a traditional job, they can go to school instead and still earn money that way. So that's another incentive to look at. I think you specialize more in the second question.
As far as technology is concerned, there are independent initiatives and things that are being done through college and prison programs in particular to incorporate more technology within places. I believe it's NYU has a computer lab that's been set up within the facility that they operate out of that's used recycled materials, like recycled computers from their computer labs on campus, but they're also working on incorporating tablets and things of that nature to be able to have people transition into using technology that they might not be familiar with. But there's also private initiatives out there that aren't necessarily degree-bearing that are incorporating things like coding and teaching people how to properly use technology as a means of giving them an opportunity when they get out of prison. So it's not necessarily that there is no technological opportunities, but the biggest barrier there is just securing the space and getting the funding to get these technological opportunities within prisons in the first place.
And last thing, just to elaborate on that, to your point, there is limited credit time allowance, which provides you a 6-month reduction off your sentence if you do college programming for 2 years. And then by the end of the year, every incarcerated individual will have a tablet free of charge in the state of New York.
Oh, sweet. Did not know that.
We didn't even know.
Hello, my name is Joseph. I'm also a student at UAlbany with the political science major. I was just curious, of the incarcerated people who do take this and eventually get their bachelor's degree, I was just curious if there's any pathway to a postgraduate degree, like a master's, doctorate, whatever they want, if there's any roadmap for them.
In terms of inside prisons, not that many. I think that Trevor mentioned that there really is only about one master's program, and it is focused on theology. So in terms of inside prison, not that many, but a lot of incarcerated students who go through these programs actually end up returning and continuing their education, and they usually end up going farther than students who were never incarcerated to begin with, because they are just they value the education that they're given and they don't take it for granted. And so when you think about like even me going to school, sometimes I wouldn't do the readings. I'm so sorry, professors, I just wouldn't do them. But we've heard time and time again that from especially teachers that these students are doing the readings and they do them all the time, and they're always engaged and they're always ready to learn. And I guess a part of that is that you don't have anything else to do. But I mean, a part of that really comes from you being inspired and you wanting to learn.
Hi, I'm scared of the mic because I'm so loud. My name is Yolanda Stewart, and I drove 4 hours from Rochester, New York to hear you guys, and you guys were amazing. It was worth So I work at Monroe Community College, it's the largest community college upstate New York. I work in admissions, and we do some things, like we offer a few classes in the local college, and we go to meetings and where folks are just returning from prison and just kind of share the services that we provide. That's really it. And so my AVP called me yesterday and was like, I need you to be at this event here today. And so obviously it's on our administrative minds, right? The topic. And so even personally I'm connected because I have a child in prison who just got to his 5 years mark left, right? So this topic is just near and dear to me. What do you recommend that I take back to my administrators? Just some advice to get going now, to do more with limited resources, because that's like the first thing on everybody's mind. We don't have money, right? Did you do or find anything in your research that I can get started right now at the college to offer more programs, to go into the prisons and really make a difference before maybe, the money's come down? Thank you.
I mean, Hudson Link actually offers a really great, like in terms of connecting, like correctional facilities in New York and community colleges. And so in terms of, starting right now, that's a hard question. I didn't
I have one.
Yeah.
I think a point that was mentioned earlier by the woman in the back who also asked the question, but a program that you could probably implement now is making sure that there are support groups for these individuals to help them transition more smoothly. Maybe if they have like other people who've also participated in these programs, they can somehow be receptive to their experiences and then help them transition based off of what they've personally done. So kind of like a support group for these individuals.
And as far as what you can bring to your administrators, one of the interviews that we conducted over the course of the semester was with someone at BARD who works in the National Programming Department. BARD has decided that the best way to scale up their programming is not to scale their own individual one, but to help other programs get started. So they do a lot of work with the things you need to do, both from the faculty end and the administrative end, and coordinating with the Department of Corrections and the individual facilities themselves. How do you get a prison program started, and what are the things you need to look out for? What are your roadmap? What's your obstacles? All these things they spent an extensive amount of time researching and looking into and helping other programs get off the ground. So if I was going to direct you somewhere, I would say reach out to BARD because they have all these resources mapped out and they've been doing it for a very long time.
Yeah, and also outside of BARD, we've obviously conducted numerous interviews throughout the semester. A lot of them were with the program directors, and some of them later on in their careers about to retire but still passionate about it, and they respond to our emails very quickly, and we spoke to them numerous times, some of them. So the community that's there, especially this interest that's here, they're really warm, welcoming. They want you to, they'll talk about it for hours. Like sometimes we're on the phone with them, we're like, okay, thank you so much for your time today. We really learned a lot about your program, because we got what we needed, but we really appreciate, one, their passion and drive for this, because a lot of them are undercompensated or not being paid or just doing this like because they truly believe in it. So the community's there for you. Just reach out to them. They're going to love to hear you.
Nicholas, they do the same thing to me here, by the way, when I'm on the phone. I thank you for coming from Rochester. I really appreciate all of you done. It was a fabulous presentation, like Linda and others have said, and that's just the sign that it's almost over. I appreciated that you also worked into your presentation and analysis the politics of the situation, because often in policy making, we can have a great policy idea, we could talk about that policy idea, but somehow as policy makers or academics, we forget, oh, wait, there's that political world too. How do you overcome the easier political argument, which you showed in your advertisement? Why are you giving people who committed a crime in society a benefit that most people like me don't get? Now, you say tablets and things are great, but why does someone who is incarcerated get a tablet on my taxpayer dime. Now, recidivism is an important piece. Are there messaging, are there things that you've seen in your research that overcome that easier political, some would say cheap argument, where it's a more complicated society, that you found that gets momentum to get policymakers to come around and say, oh, I can get behind that because that actually makes a lot of sense in the larger run? Have you, when you were talking to folks or interviewing folks, were there some messages that were resonating in a broader political environment where that easy 30-second commercial sort of kind of sticks out in people's minds?
I think we found that, especially since 2014, things have changed in the New York political landscape considerably. I think with the passage of the Excelsior Scholarship, it's much harder to make that easy argument, why are we not helping our kids when we're helping cons? Because we are helping our kids now. Through TAP and through the Excelsior Scholarship, there's considerable more access for our law-abiding citizens and our young people to be able to get educated themselves. So it's much more difficult, at least now, to be able to make the argument that we're putting our cons before our kids. As far as how do we sell this too, why would we pay for this? The studies have been very clear on this point. It actually saves money to put this in place. I think if that's communicated better to people, especially on the opposing side, if we can make it clear that this isn't about spending more money, this is about investing in something that will save us money. Most people want to reduce the size of the prisons. Most people want to spend less on corrections, and this is a surefire way to do it. There's been very little evidence to the contrary that these programs aren't effective.
And I'm also coming into this, I didn't have any knowledge prior to this, and I'm a numbers and figures type of person. I want to see the direct impact it's going to have, and with an area like this, it kind of does get into that subjective territory, like, okay, so you're providing this, I believe in that, but where is this money coming from? And pointing to your question, you said, like, what message, I guess, stands out to you in selling this politically, and that's the most recent message I think we got from New York Secretary of State when she looked at it as a public safety issue. So for the students that are going to eventually leave prison, whether they served 5 years, whether they served 15 years, do you want those individuals that are coming out of the facility to have the same amount of knowledge and education that they had when they entered that facility? And so they're eventually going to come back into your society. That's inevitable. They're in their prison, they've served their time, they're joining you as another member of society. So what knowledge and what do you want them to take from that experience they've gained in a correctional facility? And I think education there is really impactful and powerful and can just provide that education and new perspective for them leaving the facility and joining them as a member of society.
I just wanted to comment to that. I think it's super important also to tell the personal stories. It's really easy to demonize someone or a group of people when you don't know who that person is. But anybody who has been to a graduation and seen a keynote speaker in tears at the podium apologizing to his father or his mother for bringing shame on the family, or heard the personal story of how education transformed the life, I think that's where that message really has to, they're people just like everybody else. I know Bard Prison is working on a film that hopefully will be out in the fall, and it does just that. It tells the personal stories. I truly believe in the old saying, there but for the grace of God go I, and I think that's where you have to humanize people. They've done some awful things, but they're just like everybody else. So she's, yeah. So she's also talking about generational learning, and I think it's just that you tell the personal stories, you bring those to light, because they are awesome and they will impact more than anything else.
So as executive director of the program and as somebody who's worked very closely with the students over the semester, I'm going to exercise my prerogative to ask the last question. And what I actually wanted to ask you all is how many of you, before coming into this internship, have actually had any experience studying prisons or higher education? Prisons?
Maybe. I mean, my honors thesis is going to be on women in prison, so it wasn't about just that was all I've known.
So my general point is that you guys just did a really fantastic job taking a topic that you coming in knew very little about, and now here you are talking about it as if you're experts and really offering practical solutions and suggestions for some of the challenges. So I really commend you for the work that you've done this semester, for the knowledge that you've gained, and your ability to be able to share it with us. So again, thank you to our interns for their really hard work semester. They did a really fabulous job with something that was very new to them. And again, thank you. I had no idea people were traveling from 4 hours away. So thank you very much for coming.